jiggle. Set it aside. Now 12 millimeters. I've already pre-loosened them. Take those off, and now this whole thing should come off. A couple of lug taps with the hammer. And there we go. This is the tie rod end, 17 millimeter bolt. Next thing what we can do is take our axle nut off. To do this, we'll need a special socket, a thin-walled 36 millimeter. And also, what we need to do is, you see how these are kind of indented in? Here and here. You need to go with a screwdriver or something and kind of pry that out so it's smooth, so when you use your impact, it doesn't catch on these things. And once you have those off, you can use your impact and get that off. Before we do that though, let's take this dust shield off with these 3 10 millimeter bolts. We've also got this nice little ABS sensor to take off, Torx T5. Next up, 17 millimeter here. And also, we're gonna put a 17 millimeter wrench on the head of the bolt right there. Once you get the bolt off of there, I would persuade it with a hammer to move, like so. These top bolts are interesting. This is a 17 millimeter nut, but the head of the bolt is actually a 15. And that's what it fits. So anyway, take these 2 bolts out and then use the hammer and get the bolts out that way. Use a prying tool of some sort to get the knuckle free from the lower ball joint, just like that. And then you can pull up on the knuckle while you're pulling down like this to get it free. Once it's loose from the top and from the lower ball joint, you know, these splines, it should just come out like this. Make note of the ABS ring. It is on the back side of the bearing. And we'll take this over to our press and we'll press out the wheel bearing. Now, depending on what you have at your shop press, you have to do this differently. I'm having to use these wood blocks to raise the knuckle enough to where I can press this, just the inner part, just the hub, out without hitting this, because my beams here are too close together. But whatever you need to do on your situation, press out the hub. So first we just press the hub out. You can see our hub pressed out very nicely and very cleanly, but that's not always going to be the case. The inner part of this bearing can sometimes be stuck on this. So I just want to show you what you can do if that is the situation. And my other wheel bearing did not come out like this also. So this is why I have this tool. Essentially this kind of slips over and then it tightens down. And it tightens down behind the bearing race that's usually left. And then what you can do is you can take it back to your press, you can tighten this down, and then you can press out just the hub, leaving the old bearing race that's around here in place. And you will have a clean hub, just like what we have here. So this snap ring right here needs to come out. And then, once that's out, we can flip this over. We can put an appropriate size bearing press tool, and we can press out the entire bearing. So we're gonna do that next. Now this thing is not fun to pry out. What I like to do is get a flathead right behind this lip right here, and as it lifts up, you can see it lifting up just a little bit. I like to get a second flathead right underneath it to stop it from coming out, and then follow that all the way around and get this snap ring out. Just to show you what I mean, I put this knife right here as I was prying up on that, and now using this knife, that's going to stop the snap ring from going back down. I can continue to pry up on this, and be careful. Anyway, get it all the way across. We take it over to our press. We make sure it sits even. I'm going to use a 63 millimeter, or 65 millimeter pressing tool, and then we're going to start to press it out. Now with our new bearing, remember, ABS ring goes on the inside. This, where the screw is the inside part. So you can kind of just set this in place and you get something that's the size of the bearing, approximately, and then you can press it in. Alternatively, if you don't have something like this, you could potentially just get the old bearing, put it on like that, and then press it in. Now comes the tricky part. We have to press this hub onto the bearing. So how do we do that? Well, let's think about where the hub has to go. It's got to go on the outside of the bearing, and we already established that this part where the screw is the inside. So we set this on top. All right. Now we can only press on this inner surface. If we press on the outside, the inner outer bearing will separate like this. So we're going to select something that only presses down on here. And I think one of our smallest kind of presses might be just right for this. Maybe one more size up. Something like this, a 50 millimeter. And we'll use this to press it in. Now that our bearing is only making contact with the inner bearing, not with the outer bearing, we can start to press in the hub. We're bottomed out there, so we'll let go and we'll see what we got. Press this out, and there we go. It's all pressed in. You can see there's no gap there. This spins freely as it should. Now, with the snap ring, you have to be careful. You have to put it back. Yeah, it's gonna be really tough to put it back. I'm not gonna lie to you. Basically, essentially what you have to do is like get in one side and then start to press it in, and then you can start to kind of maybe twist this upper part like this. You can see how it's kind of starting to set in, and this part's set in, and then it's easier with tools. But you got to make sure your ABS sensor comes through here. So this gap right here, it's got to be right there. Otherwise your ABS sensor won't fit. All right, so snap ring is back in place, and we got space for our ABS sensor. So now we're gonna slap this puppy back on the car. So put the knuckle back onto the axle, and then just make sure that it slides through, which in my case it has. And then put it here and slide it into the strut bolts right here, if you can. Have it slide in right there. And then you can kind of lift up this whole assembly, push down on the ball joint, and this ball joint is angled backwards, so I'm gonna push it forward till it's angled in the right spot, and then again kind of push down on that, push up on this, and we've kind of come out of here with our strut. We're back in, and once you're at this point, you can kind of angle everything back and forth, and see that's in place, and this is in place. I would put one bolt in here just to kind of temporarily hold it in place. Ignore my baby in the background. But yeah, you can just put a bolt right through here, just lift on it. So that's kind of gonna hold it in place. And then our bottom bolt also, we're gonna put that through the ball joint, and that's gonna hold the ball joint in place. Just make sure you tighten down these nuts and this, and also the 17 millimeter that goes on the bottom of the tire, and you know, just seat it in place. I'm actually gonna be replacing this, but we'll cover that in a different video. After you have all those tightened down, I would go ahead and take your ABS sensor, and I would put it back right in there. And at that point, we can put our dust shield back on that we took off earlier that can cover all this back up again. Okay, so once you have all that on, I don't have my tie rod on because I need to replace that. I need to get a new part, but you got the dust shield on and everything on. You need to put this back on. So there's a proper torque spec for this. You can look it up on the internet. Look at that, it's properly torqued. And then what you want to do is those little things that we spent hours and hours hammering out. You're gonna hammer them back in so the nut doesn't spin back off. And then do it on both sides. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna throw the rotor back on, just like that. And we're gonna put the little pins that go in here. And then after we're done with that, sorry, I'm doing this in real time, so it's probably taking forever. After we're done with that, we're gonna take our brake caliper. We're gonna line it back up. And this is gonna go on, ideally, without any adjustments. All right, I'm gonna struggle here for a little bit. I'm gonna cut back to when I have it on. Okay, so then on the back side, you see how this isn't quite all the way. So you gotta make sure it's lined up, and then put the bolt back through. You may have to play with it a little bit until you get it just right and you feel the bolt slide into place, like so. And then, I know it's not in all the way, but then the bottom one, which you probably can't see right now, but then there's the bottom caliper bolt, which you can just do by feel. You don't have to take a look at it. And then, just tighten those down, and then that's it. Pretty much you throw your wheel on and your wheel bearing's done.